Welcome everybody that's joining us. Thank you for coming along to today's webinar, making time to join us. Really nice to see lots of you joining. We'll be starting at a couple of minutes past the hour because we've got quite a few people signed up for today. So I just want to give people a chance to move between various online meetings. As ever, we're always really interested to know where you're dialing in from today. So if you haven't joined before, in the chat, just pop where you're dialing in from, and if you have joined before, then you'll know this bit because we always do it. Let's see where we got people joining in from. Dialing in from even. I can't even speak today. Dialing in from Rugby. Oh, I was going to say Ludlow. That's you, Lee. I got really excited then. I know Ludlow.
You know that.
I do. It's a bit of a story, guys, while we're waiting to start. Weirdly, Lee and I, we met through work many years ago. We were working on a project together for the Institute of Internal Communications. And I said to Lee, oh, whereabouts do you live? And he had moved to the little tiny village that I grew up in that no one's ever heard of. He said, oh, it's a little place in Shropshire. You might have heard of it. I said, oh, I'm from Shropshire. I might have heard of it. And he said, Clibry Mortimer. And like, no one's ever heard of Clibry Mortimer. I was like, no way. I said, I grew up there. And Lee said, I'm probably sat right now in your old English room because they converted the school, didn't they, Lee? So a little bit of a small world story for you to get us started. Oh, Barcelona, very nice.
The haunted school.
Yeah.
I think Barcelona's winning for exotic location at the moment.
It is.
Sorry, Harrow. What, not rugby? I know my brother lives in Rugby, Deborah, so I know it quite well.
Right, many years ago, I used to be in a band, and when you're in a band the size that we were in, which means you've got to play a lot, but they actually call it the toilet circuit because you do play in a lot of places that used to be old toilets, and you get to see the length and the breadth of every little town in the UK, and I've been pretty much everywhere. It's in some really interesting places. So I think we're probably ready to sort of get started. So welcome everybody. My name's Emma Bridger and I'm joined by my colleagues Lee Smith and Katie Austin. I'm one of the founders of the EX Space and also People Lab. EX Space, if you don't know already, is a membership-based learning community. Got over 100 members, only launched a few months ago, got over 100 members already who are going through an accredited program to become accredited EX masters and develop their EX and engagement skills. That's all going very well, very exciting. As part of that, we want to bring this community together. So we put on host events like this to find the good and the great in this world of EX and engagement, like Deborah today, to come along and share their thoughts, their insights. Sometimes we have what we call insights sessions like today, where we have an expert come in. Other times we have what we call the EX files, are like case studies. So you can see behind the curtain of what is really happening inside organizations. So we've got a great one coming up soon with Scott Rail, haven't we? I'm looking at Katie now, haven't we, Katie, on that one?
We have, really, yeah, that'll be coming up in March.
Yeah, so really great program. That's probably all the intro we need. Anything I've forgotten that you want to add to that?
Thank you. Sorry, I'm muted. No, I think you've covered it all, Emma. Good stuff. Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, if you want to know anything more about EX Space or indeed People Lab, drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, I think we should just get stuck straight in, not waste any more time with me talking. Let's hear from Deborah. So I'm going to pass over to Katie, who's there on my screen, to introduce Deborah and introduce the topic for today, which I am really looking forward to. And I many years ago, I thought it'd be great to sort of do an anonymous book on this subject where people could share their stories. So maybe that can come out today. Who knows? So over to you, Katie.
Thanks very much, Emma. Yes, I think most of us have had a story of a bad boss, whether that's experiencing it firsthand or witnessing it or hearing about it from a friend. So I think it'll be really, really interesting. So handing over to Deborah then. So Debra Corey is a highly experienced, award-winning HR consultant and world-class speaker who for the 4th year in a row has been named one of the top 101 global employee engagement influencers. So congratulations, Deborah, that's fantastic. After 20 years working for global companies such as Gap, Merlin and Reward Gateway, she now pays it forward by inspiring and helping others to develop and deliver people and culture strategies and initiatives in what we like to think of as a rebellious way, pushing the boundaries and challenging the status quo to truly drive employee engagement and business performance. In addition, Deborah has published 6 books on various subjects, including employee engagement, company values, recognition, and internal communications. And her latest book, which is what we're all here for today, is about bosses, bad and great. So with such a wealth of knowledge, I'm sure this won't be the last you see of Deborah through the EX space. We would absolutely love to welcome her back in the future to delve into some of those other topics. But for now, I'm going to hand you over to Deborah, and we're going to talk about bosses. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. I thought before I start sharing my screen, since we're all about EX and employee experience, and I can still see the chat box, what percentage do you think a boss has an impact on employees? So we in HR can come up with the best programs in the world, but what percentage do you think a boss plays on whether or not an employee is engaged or not? Is it 10%, 20%, 100%? What do you think? How much of an impact do they have as a boss? Got an 80, we've got a 75, an 80, 70. Okay, you guys have seen this before. It's from Gallup, and you're right, it's 70%. And I don't know about you guys, but anytime I do a session with bosses, I pretty much lead with that piece of data, just showing the important role that bosses have to play. So with that being said, let's make sure I can share my screen. Give me 1 second. It worked when we tried it at the beginning, right? Share screen. And where is it? There it is. Share. And then, okay, perfect. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, that's working perfectly. Thank you.
Fantastic. So this is the beautiful cover of my new book. You can tell I like purple. And also we picked purple because purple is a sign of greatness. And although this book is called Bad Bosses Ruin Lives, if you look at the second part of the title, the building blocks for being a great boss, it really is focusing on helping every single boss be great. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview about the book. My goal today is to help people start thinking a little bit differently about bad bosses and give you a couple ideas to take back and think about for either you as a boss or for you and your organization. So I'm going to answer 3 really simple questions before I open it up for you guys for questions. So by all means, jot them down. I'll make sure I leave lots of time for questions. And I thought I would do it really simple today. I thought I would do the why, the what, and the how. So why is this an important topic? Why did we decide to write the book? Then move on to the what. So what does it mean to be a bad boss? And about not quite half of the book is on that. And we talk about what we call the 10 types of bad bosses. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about is okay, how do you be great? And that's what the larger half of the book is on, which is a model, because if anyone's read any of my other books, I do love a good model. And I'll be sharing with you a very high level on what I call the great boss building block model. Okay, so hopefully that'll give you some good takeaways. So I said I wanted to start with the why. I always like sort of taking a step back and thinking about the why. As an HR person, we do that all the time, don't we? We do it when we design our strategy programs and our individual programs. So I thought I'd do that now. And I wanted to answer 3 questions, because these are questions that people ask me all the time. First of all, why did we decide to write the book? And I should have said that at the beginning. I did not write this book by myself. I had a co-author. It's my second time I've had a co-author, actually. And he just happens to be my husband. And the reason that I decided to write the book, first of all, was because I've had a bad boss before. And I think at the beginning, everyone said how we've all had a bad boss. And that is true. We've all had a bad boss. But also, and this is what I would love to change, I would love by the end of this call, all of us to say, I've had a bad boss, but also I've been a bad boss. And do you know what? I have been a bad boss. And it was actually quite cathartic writing the book, because as I was writing the book, I was like, oh, yep, I've done that. Yep, I've done that. And to me, it's all about what do you do with those moments? How do you take those moments when you got it wrong and turn it into something great? So that's why I decided to write the book. I invited my husband to join me because he's a boss himself, a very different boss. He's an engineer. He's a developer. So he thinks very differently than I do. And I really thought that the book would be better if I had these two very different perspectives. So that's why we joined forces and wrote the book together. And I'm very pleased to say that we're still married. So you can work together and it ended up being a success. So why this book? Why did we decide to do it? Well, because we saw a problem, and I'm going to share some statistics with you. I already talked about how, you know, a boss's role is so important, but there's tons of books on bosses. So what kind of problem did we see that we decided to write it in this way? And why is our approach slightly different than others? And I'm going to go into a bit more detail when I go through something that I called myths and misconceptions. But what we were trying to do in this book, hopefully, is make it absolutely okay for people to raise their hand and say, do you know what? I've been a bad boss. I am a bad boss, and accept it and then do something about it. Because I personally believe that one of the reasons we've got such a problem is that we spend so much time thinking about those bad bosses as those 1%, you know, the ones you see on television, movies, cartoons. And to be honest, that's not the majority. That is not the majority of what a bad boss is. There's so many other ways to be a bad boss. So let me share some statistics with you. Starting on the left-hand side, when we wrote the book, we decided to do a survey because we all love surveys. And we did 2 surveys. We went out globally and we asked, how many of you have had a bad boss? And it was a bit of a surprise. I knew it was going to be high, but I did not think it was going to be this high. So the top left number, 99.6%. So almost every single person has had a bad boss. I think there were 2 people who have not had a bad boss. And I keep saying I'm going to go back and talk to them and find out what their secret is, why they haven't had a bad boss. What was really scary, though, was we asked people how long you've been in the workplace, because I was hoping, even though this number was big, that, you know, maybe people new to the workforce, it wasn't as bad. They might not have had as many kinds of bad bosses. There was no difference whatsoever. So what that shows to me is that the problem is not getting better. But on the good news, when we went out and we asked people about themselves as a boss, 80% of people admitted it, which is actually higher than I thought. I thought a lot of people would have been like, no, it's not me. So the good news is that 80%. So that basically says that there is a problem. And also, if you think about when there's this problem, what's the impact? And we have tons of data in the book trying to show the impact. And I just thought I'd pick 2 pieces just for today. And the one on the top right says that about 6 out of 10 people said they left because of their boss. I actually think that might be higher. I think a lot of times, I don't know about you guys, but when I do exit interviews, people are like, I'm leaving for the money, or I'm leaving for a promotion. Well, let's be real. If things were going well with you and your boss, you probably wouldn't have been looking for another job anyway. So it's personally, I think it's probably closer to like 8 out of 10, but I could be wrong. And then the next piece of data says that about 7 out of 10 people said that the area that has the biggest impact on their mental health, which we all know how challenging it can be from a mental health perspective, was actually their boss. It tied with your partner. So what that shows is that going into work every single day can have a huge, huge impact on your mental health. So going back to the title of the book, it can actually ruin your lives. So bottom line, add all this data together, I think it's a time that we need to start thinking about bosses differently, both what it means, but also how we can help bosses overcome the things that aren't working right now. Now, one of the ways that I wanted to do this was I talked about myths and misconceptions, and we have 7 of them in the book. And as I go through them, think through in your mind what this means to you, what you think of now and where you think you can go in the future. So the first one is that all bad bosses know that they're bad bosses. Now, although 80% of people admitted to being a bad boss, I'm going to show you later on the disconnect between, yes, they might have said that they're a bad boss, but admitting the types of bad bosses doesn't always happen. So I think that's part of the problem, is that we ourselves don't know that we're being a bad boss. And I'm not necessarily blaming the bosses. To be honest with you, a lot of times as employees, we don't tell our boss they're doing things wrong. So actually the next book that my husband and I want to write is a version for employees. The next one is you're either bad, good, or great. It is not so black and white. It is actually very gray, because we've got 10 types of bad bosses I'm going to share with you. And you might be brilliant at 9 of them. I had a boss who was absolutely amazing at 9, but there was one that he got wrong over and over and over again. And you know, that's fine. I'm not expecting perfection. I just think, again, it goes back to awareness, being aware that actually it's not all bad, it's not all good, it's all great. It's a combination of all of them. The next one, everyone wants the same things from their boss. I think that's one of the main reasons why it's so hard to be a great boss, because you might be doing things really, really well in one area for 90% of your people, but then you might have 10% of your people who need you to do it in a different way. So it's almost like an uphill battle. It can be done, but that's one of the problems that we have, is thinking that we can do things the same for everyone. The next one is there's only a few skills we need to be a great boss. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be like 3 things, my magic secret, 3 things that you could do and you'll be a great boss? Unfortunately, there's lots of skills. But again, I'm not trying to scare bosses. There's not hundreds of skills. I say that there's 14 building blocks and you don't have to use them all at time. But again, it's that awareness that actually we need to build our skills, and actually we need to build different skills than we might have had in the past. The next one, once you get it right, it's smooth sailing again. Wouldn't that be nice? But as we know, the world keeps changing. We keep getting curveballs from the world, from our people, from society. So we just need to be on our toes and realize that we need to continually be looking at what is going to work and what doesn't work. The next one is one of those misconceptions, and I've had this happen to myself, is that you get promoted because you're a great boss. No, most of the time you get promoted because you are a great individual contributor. One of the stories I share in my book was when I moved from the US to the UK to be a boss for the first time, and made huge mistakes, huge, because I wasn't given the support to actually learn how to be a great boss. So we need to remember it's a different skill set. And then final myth, and this goes back to the title of the book, bad bosses do not ruin lives. And the reason that I say this is that I don't know if you've had a really bad boss before. Hopefully you haven't, but I interviewed people for the book. And what I heard over and over again was that you have a bad boss, you have a bad day at work, and then you magically can't just walk into your house, walk into your personal life, and everything will be perfect. It just doesn't happen. Our minds, we're humans. It doesn't work that way. And in talking to people over and over again, I came up with this term, which is not a pleasant term, bad boss stress disorder. And the reason I came up with it is that when I spoke to people and interviewed people who had a bad boss, they didn't just ruin their lives while they were working for them. Unfortunately, there were so many people where I heard, do you know what? It took me months to get over the pain and the agony. It took me a year. I even had some people who said, you know what? It's 10 years and I'm not over it. So I don't say this to scare bosses, but just to let them know the profound impact that they have, so that they can get really behind the whole idea of doing it well and doing it great. Okay, so that's the why. So what do I mean by a bad boss? And again, wouldn't it be great if there was just one type of bad boss? These are what we came up with as the 10. I have to be honest with you. We interviewed 25 thought leaders as we were doing the book, and these changed every time I spoke to people and as I interviewed people of their bad bosses. Are they perfect? No, but they're actually, I think they're pretty reflective of the depth and breadth of what it takes to be a great boss and what it takes to be a bad boss. You might be wondering why I have these cute little emojis. Well, one of the things I said at the beginning is that I would love for every person to just raise their hand and admit, you know what? That I've been a bad boss. So I wanted to make it something people weren't too embarrassed about. They're like, do you know what? I'm that avoider. I'm that ghost in the top left-hand corner. Do you know what? I'm going to get better at it, but that's where I am right now. Or I'm a pretender. You know what? I wear a mask too often. I'm not as honest with my people. I need to change. So that's how we came up with these 10 different types of bad bosses. I'm not going to go through them in detail. At the end in questions, I'm more than happy to explain them in more detail, but I'll just read them out first. So we've got the avoider. We've got the ignorer. Hopefully the names actually help you understand what they are. You've got the hoarder, and the pictures too. The unappreciator, the pretender, the blocker, the firefighter. A great boss. That was the only kind of bad boss he was, but he was definitely a firefighter. He would love to just go from one big exciting project to another. So sometimes without strategy. So yeah, that we had to wear our fire helmets with him sometimes. The micromanager, the blamer, and then the coercer. And again, even with the names, we tried not to make them too evil so that people would feel okay saying, do you know what, that's me. So, pardon? Oops, I can't hear. Anyway, so I've got a question for you. I won't be able to read the comments, but the lovely EX team is going to share them with me. What do you think, when we went out to employees, which type of bad boss do you think was the one that was the most common, that most people said, I've had one of those? Anybody just want to jump into the chat and say, which do you think of the 10 was the most prevalent, most common?
Okay, we've got micromanager. Oh, micromanager's definitely coming up a lot there. What else have we got here? The pretender has come up a couple of times. The avoider as well. But yeah, micromanager's the one that's coming up loads here.
And you know, it's funny, I actually thought the micromanager was going to come up the most. I have to admit, I was a micromanager. Do you know what? I am always going to be a micromanager. That's just my personality style, but I just try not to wear it with people. Just ask my husband when we were writing the book. I had to keep stopping micromanaging. Well, let me share with you what the results were. So let's look one side at a time. So the first column is the type of the bad boss. And then the next column is what did people say about their bosses? And these are ranked high to low. So micromanager was second. But what was really surprising and actually quite upsetting, because my book that I wrote before this book was on appreciation. So unfortunately, the most common was the unappreciator. And just like the word, it's someone who doesn't show appreciation to the people, doesn't recognize them, you know. And what I find so frustrating about that one is that often it doesn't have to cost a lot of money to do it. So I'm hoping that people will, between this new book and my old book, that this will change. Micromanager and avoider were tied. Avoider was an interesting one. So avoider is someone there, if you remember, that's the one that looked like a ghost. So that's the one who isn't there for you physically, or they might avoid giving you feedback. So they're hiding from you. I wasn't as surprised with that one, only because I think bosses are still trying to get used to managing people who might not be in the same room with them all the time. So that's one that hopefully I think will get better. So yeah, those are the top three: unappreciator, micromanager, avoider. Just so you guys know, you will get copies of the slides, so you don't have to write down all this data. What was really interesting is look on the column on the right. This is what people said about themselves. So one thing you might notice already is that on the left-hand side, every single type of boss had more than 50%. 51% was the lowest. On the right-hand side, not one type of boss had more than 50%. So what that shows is a little bit of a lack of awareness. And I get that. First of all, they might not understand what they all mean, but also until you really take a hard look at yourself, you're not going to realize it. If you look for the one, actually the one that was the highest was pretender, which I think a couple people said was the highest. That didn't surprise me, because a pretender is almost like a safe one, because a pretender is someone who, you know, when I ask them why you're a pretender, they might say, well, I'm trying to protect my people, which I've done myself. You know what, things are tough, something happened that's bad, I might not want to give them bad feedback. You're protecting your people. But what I try to get across in the book is that actually that doesn't help your people. So that was the highest, pretender. And then firefighter came in second at 40%, and micromanager was 39%. So really, really interesting how people viewed themselves and how they viewed their bosses. I just wanted to point this out. It costs absolutely nothing. So I'm trying to get people to take this test. It's a free test that we created, and there's, I think, 50 questions, completely confidential. And what it'll help bosses do is it'll tell them, actually, you know what, based off of how you answer this questions, actually, these are your 3 top ones. And then we also give people some building blocks, so some things to do as well. So if you're curious, it doesn't go to anyone else, it's just for yourself. By all means, take this. Yeah, there we go. At the bottom, I put the link to it for it, because it has to start with awareness. If we don't get awareness and acceptance, we're never going to be moving on to the next one, which is action. And speaking of action, so how do you do it? You find out that, you know what, I'm a micromanager, and I'm an appreciator, and a pretender. What in the world do I do? Well, Dun, dun, dun. The answer to this is something called the Great Bosses Building Block Model. Now, when we were coming up with this, I have to admit, I did not want 14 blocks. I don't know about you, but remembering 14 things is really hard for my mind. My mind cannot do it. But as we were writing it, as we were interviewing all these thought leaders, we thought, do you know what? There's not one of these that I can take off. And do you know what? That's okay. Because as I said at the beginning, you don't have to use all of them at the same time. And also what we tried to do was, if you are this type of bad boss, do you know what? Focus on these 3. Okay, you don't focus on all 14, but focus on all 3. So let me just give you a high level on the building blocks. And again, I'm not going to go through all the detail. I'm happy to answer questions later on it. We've tried to separate them, or we have separated them into 2 types of blocks. And this is really intentional. The ones on the bottom, we call the foundation blocks, or I affectionately call the 6-pack, because first of all, there's 6 of them. And also, if you think about a 6-pack, they're sort of holding your core strength together. They're helping you do things better. And these are the 6 that, as the world has been changing around us, I'm sure you agree, are more important now than ever before. Things like respect and trust, and we have them next to each other because they work together. Things like authenticity and vulnerability, we're all finding how important that is, and empathy and compassion. So if you get the core right, the others, the supporting ones, can build on top of that. And the bottom ones are more behaviors, and the top ones are more tools. So as a boss, what are the tools that I have to really help and support my people? Things like listening and communications. We all know how important that is. Feedback and appreciation. Appreciation is a form of feedback. Development and coaching, both really important in different ways. And then empowerment, which links directly to micromanager, and inspiration. So for each of these, what we try to do is we try to show why it matters, because a lot of times you get skeptics, you get these bosses and say, I don't understand why authenticity is important. It wasn't important to me. It's not important to me. It wasn't important to my boss. Why should it be important? So I really want to focus on explaining why it matters, and then also give people some tools. So to give you a little bit of flavor of this, I was just going to pick 2 of them and walk you through 2 of the building blocks. I've got enough time for this. Yeah? Yeah? Cool. All right.
Lovely.
So since appreciation was the one that was the highest, I thought I would talk a little bit about this. And by all means, with your bosses on this next slide, share with them why it matters. Cut and paste it, whatever it takes, make them understand why it's so important. And these are just 5 different statistics. On my book in appreciation, I have a whole chapter just to make sure that I've got tons of data to convince anybody why it matters. Besides it just feeling good, but besides that, first of all, people are not going to stay with their company if they do not feel appreciated. 5 times more likely to stay if you feel appreciated, which makes sense. If my boss never appreciates me, I'm going to think, well, great. Why should I stick around? I want to work for someone who does. They're also more satisfied. Again, if someone's showing you appreciation, I'm going to feel much more satisfied. 44% say they thrive even more. More productive. To me, this is a no-brainer. If I don't get any feedback when I'm doing things well, how am I going to know that I'm doing it well? And how am I going to do it over and over again and perform and be more productive? So absolutely. More engaged. Again, I'm going to feel a sense of pride. I'm going to feel engaged 4 times more. And then more connected. Because I don't know what you do at your company when it comes to recognition and appreciation, but I love that informal, that casual, that I call it crowdsourcing approach, where everybody is jumping in and congratulating and thanking. And that's when you get these connections and these feeling that you belong to an organization. This is one of my favorite quotes. I have it at the beginning of my other book because I just think Maya Angelou just said it so well, which is that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And this works with appreciation, but to be honest with you, it works every aspect of being a boss. So 3 things that I wanted to talk about, and by all means, share these with your bosses in your company. These are not difficult things. These do not cost a lot of money. The first one is to put on your appreciation glasses. I'm a big believer that you're not going to do something if you don't see it. So sometimes when I do talks in front of managers, I bring 3D glasses with me. And just to make the point that you need to start looking everywhere and anywhere, because if you're not looking for it, you're never going to see it, which is probably why a lot of bosses miss it, because they're so busy doing everything else, it's not on their radar. The next one is to remember your glue people. When I was writing my book, I interviewed someone from the NBA, National Basketball Association, and I love what he explained as glue people. And he said that, you know, we've got these amazing people who score baskets all the time, and they get their appreciation all the time. Every time the crowd applauds them or they get these awards. But what about those glue people? What about those people who are stealing the ball from another player or throwing their body across the court to grab a ball before it goes out of the line, or anything else that they're doing? These are the people that we need to do. And I say that because I'm sure a lot of people don't feel appreciated because their boss forgets them. So they don't just see them. They might see it, but they might not realize, do you know what? That was just as important as the person who scored. That person who threw the ball to them, I'm going to thank them. I'm going to show them appreciation. So challenge your bosses to not forget the glue people. And then finally, make it a habit. I think something like this, I'm working with a company in creating a new recognition program, and they just wrote to me and they said, you know what, it's not working. It's not sticking. We've had it in place 2 weeks and people just aren't doing it. Well, we all know how long it takes to make something a habit. And we need to constantly be talking about it, whether it's appreciation or anything else, talking about it over and over again so that we can make it a habit. So that's appreciation. Communication. Thought I would pick that one also because that impacts a lot of the other ones, the avoider, the ignorer, even the micromanager. It touches on so many of the different types of bad bosses. And again, if you need data to convince your bosses why they shouldn't hoard information, why they shouldn't avoid communicating things to their people, just cut and paste these. They're great stats. First of all, we waste time if we don't communicate because people don't have all the data. So almost 68% less wasted time, less missed messages because people are going to see it. You're communicating it over and over again. The next one I think is so important about burnout. If you don't get information, if your boss is hoarding it from you, you're stressed out. You're wondering what's going on. Whenever I do communications workshops, I'm like, your employee's version of the truth is so much worse than the truth. So don't stress them out. Don't lead them to burnout. Communicate what's going on. Obviously, it's going to lead to bad customer experiences because your employees don't have everything they need to do a good job, which means you're going to lose them. And then if all else fails, the reason you need to communicate and do it over and over again is something called the forgetting curve. Don't know if you ever heard this before. Next time you need a bit of trivia. So study was found that says that we forget 50% of what we hear in 30 minutes. So 30 minutes from now, if I went back to all you lovely people and I asked you what I said, you're going to forget half of what I said. Then 70 to 80% of what's communicated, you lose in a day, and 90% by the end of the week. So just when you think as a boss, you think, oh, I've told them this once, I don't need to tell them again. Remember the forgetting curve because they're going to forget 90% of it by the end of the week anyway. So that's why communication matters. So just a couple of things. And to be honest with you, this works for bosses, but we in HR, when I do communications with HR, I share similar types of tips. The first one is to be transparent and telling people the entire story. Too often in one of my books, I think I wrote something about that we spend too much time lying or hiding the truth from our people. And as I said before, they're going to come up with something which is much worse. So you might as well show them respect, show them trust, and give them the truth as a boss or in HR. Communicate with empathy. When I was researching for the book, I was reading Brené Brown. I love Brené Brown. She's amazing. And she said something that really stuck with me because I always say to people, put yourself in your employee's shoes, be empathetic. And her point was, do you know what? You're never going to be in their shoes, which really makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? No one is ever going to be in the same situation as you, which is fine. But still, if you can try to understand things from their perspective, try to understand how they're going to react to something. Oops, am I okay?
Yeah,
Sounded...
it's all fine. It's working again.
Yeah, I heard myself echo. The more it's going to help, especially as a boss. And I've learned that the hard way, saying something to my people and not realizing, you know, they go away and have a cup of coffee and they're all in tears because, you know, they thought the impact was going to be one way and it was another impact. And then the last one is don't assume, check for understanding. Often when I do communication workshops, I do whisper down the lane. Have you ever done that as a child, where you tell one person and you whisper it to someone else? And it's amazing how different it gets by the time it gets to the end. So I try to make that point that if you're going to communicate something to your people, make sure that they actually heard what you wanted them to hear, which is why a lot of times we have to communicate over and over again. So hopefully that gave you an idea of some of the things that I'm trying to do through this book and through this you know, the whole concept of what we're trying to do. The bit about let's all become aware of our bad boss traits, accept them, take some action, and then take some accountability. I've got 2 websites where I've got lots of free things if anybody wants to go to. One is my regular website, which is information on everything other than bad bosses, and then the bad bosses one as well. So with that being said, sorry, I did try to talk very fast to get things in there. I'm going to open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I'm sure both Emma and Lee have probably got questions to add, but I would just invite everybody to pop their questions in the chat as well, and we can field them directly to Deborah. There were a couple of questions that came through whilst you were presenting, actually, Deborah. Just people keen to explore those 10 bosses again a little bit more. In particular, the Pretender. Was it the Pretender? I think no. Was it Pretender? Let me just double check. Yeah, the Pretender. We wondered whether or not it was kind of related to imposter syndrome, or so if we could have a little bit of a delve into those in a little bit more detail, that'd be amazing if you've got a moment to do that.
Sure. Do you want me to do all of them? I mean, I could just sort of read through all of them at a high level, if that helps. The other thing I'd suggest is if you want to, if you're not going to remember it, because remember 90% of what I say you're going to forget, if you go on the Bad Bosses website, there's a little bit of summary of all of them as well. So some of them are easier than the others. So the first one was the avoider. Yep. And the avoider is the one with the ghost. And the way I like to think about this person is that they're not there for their person. They're hiding away as a ghost would do. So either, have you ever had a boss where every time you want to meet with them, you can just never track them down? You have no idea where they are, which, you know, it sounds funny, but it's not funny because they get in your way. Or they avoid giving you difficult information, difficult feedback. Maybe they, you know, anything that they're avoiding things. The next one is the ignorer, and we've got headphones on that one. And that's somebody who doesn't really listen to their people. They're just in la la land. They're not, you know, all the great ideas that the people have, they're not listening to them, or they might be listening, but not doing anything. So what's that expression? Lip service. They're playing lip service to them. The hoarder, that's the person who just holds on to everything. We've got their mouth shut for that one. So they're not sharing information with you as well. So they're not just listening, they're not sharing it out with you. The unappreciator, spoke about that one. The pretender, that's that person. We put a mask there. I cannot tell you how hard it was to come up with these emojis. I think it was almost as hard as writing the book, coming up with an emoji. We wanted something that really depicted it. And we came up with the mask because that, to me, is what a pretender is. They're wearing this mask. They're either maybe they just don't want to make it difficult for their people. So they're hiding the truth. They're hiding discomfort. They're just wearing this mask because they're just either afraid to, or they think that it's the right thing for their people. And actually, it's like some of the other bosses, it's setting them up for failure. The blocker, they get in their way. A lot of times the blocker gets in the way of you growing, so getting to the next level. They might not think that development is important. Do you remember the 2 blocks, development and coaching? So they might like say, oh, you know, we're too busy. I'm not sending you on a development course. Or do you know what? You're doing fine now. You don't need new skills. So they're really blocking what you really need from them and to be your best self. The firefighter, just like the word sounds, they're really reactive. So my firefighter boss, as I said before, would just love going from one sexy project to another. We used to joke and we used to say that if he doesn't come back a second time, that we're not going to start working on it, which probably isn't good. Micromanager, we know what they are, overly involved in their work. They control everything that we're doing. A blamer. That one, that was not as common on both sides as some of the other ones, which was good. But I heard this from people where they'd have a boss where they would just, you notice we had the finger pointing for this one. They're pointing fingers. So I think I called them the Teflon boss. You know, I did nothing wrong. It was my team. They like throw you. Have you ever had a boss, you're in a meeting and your boss just is like, oh yeah, that's because so-and-so did something wrong. Again, taking no responsibility for anything. And then the coercer, you know, I wanted to call it the bully, but I didn't want any of the words to be negative, but that's the person who really uses power. I was surprised it wasn't as high as I heard in interviewing people, but yeah, that's that one who uses power to get their way. But for all of them, as I said before, each of them, I don't know if people genuinely do them on purpose, or they don't realize the impact of why they did it. Even the micromanagers, they don't, you know, when I was a micromanager, I thought I was helping my people. Little did I know I wasn't. Was that good for the 10? That was very cool.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much for taking the time to go through those. And obviously I do urge everybody else on the call, if you want to explore those a little bit further, to get a copy of the book. We will be sending out a link to the book when we send out the slides and the recording as well. There are some questions coming through in the chat, but I'm sure Emma and Lee are desperate to get in as well. So Emma, Lee, anything in particular that you wanted to delve into before we go to the chat?
Do you want to go first or me, Emma? I've got plenty of questions.
Yeah, go for it then, Lee. You go for it.
Yeah, Deborah, first of all, great session, really refreshing, clear thinking on, you know, often a lot of what's written about leadership is quite theoretical and abstract. And I think you've done a great job there of bringing it, you know, making it real for us. I'm interested, you know, the last 3 to 4 years have been fascinating, haven't they? With the start of the pandemic, we switched to kind of home-based working. And now we're in this world, you've still got the sort of ongoing battles with employers trying to get people back into the office. But I think in most cases, we've shifted towards what I'd call a kind of hybrid approach, a mix of home and office. With all that backdrop, has that amplified the problem of bad bosses? Has it made it easier for these folk to hide or get away with it? And where's it going? Just that sort of macro level landscape thing. Interested in your thoughts.
You know, you're going to hate me for this, but I think the answer is yes and no. I think for some bosses, it's going to make it a lot harder because it's something that's new to them. It's something uncomfortable to them. So if you think about the different types of bad bosses, you know, I might have been really good at communicating with my people in the past when we were all together all the time. But now that we're all dispersed, it makes it really hard. But some bosses, it might come more natural to them. They might love the idea of doing it, and they might see it as exciting because actually managing in this new way, you can be more effective. To me, I think, again, it's just understanding the different needs of your people, to your point, based off of how the world is changing and how myself as a boss, is what I was doing in the past going to continue to work, or is it not going to work? You know, if you do weekly huddles, I know it's silly, but how do you do weekly huddle when half the people are in the room and half the people aren't in the room? I remember when this was well before the pandemic. I remember we used to have pictures of everybody so that when they weren't physically in the room with us, we'd put their picture on a chair so we didn't forget them. Because what we found the first couple of meetings is we'd forget the poor people who were on the phone. So again, I think, you know, it can make it harder for probably more people, but for some people, it might make it easier.
Thank you. That actually segues really nicely to my other question before we hand over to Em. But we're notoriously bad when people are promoted, right, based on technical ability. They're good at their job. They get gifted this role of being a manager or a leader of people. And we're notoriously bad at training them and giving them the skills they need to be people leaders. How important is that training bit for you? And you talked a lot about skills. How do we flip this? How do we actually make that start to happen? Because it's really frustrating.
Yeah, and you know, I'd almost take a step back, and before you even get into training, are we putting the right people into the job, or are we putting people into the job because there's nowhere else to go? I don't know about you and your organizations, but you know, sometimes because of career paths, the only way to get ahead is to be a boss. And the only reason they want to be a boss is so they can make more money, or they can sit at the leadership table or something like that. So I'm a big believer in making sure that you have people be a boss because they want to. And if my husband, my co-author, was here, I always tell the story of how for years I tried to get him to be a boss, not for the money, but because I saw how amazing he was with our children, with other people, and I thought he'd be a fantastic boss. But he never wanted to do it. He's like, I love coding. I don't want to be around people. I don't want to do it. And finally, it was his decision to do it. And I think that's part of the reason why he is such a great boss, because he did it for the right reasons. But then answering your question, absolutely. You know, I mentioned before about, you know, I not only moved from one country to another the first time I was a boss, I had no training. And culturally, I was just, we all do things the way we've seen others do it. And as an American, I was taught you just give that feedback, you do it, and you know, you don't talk circles, you just go right for it. And the joke that I tell in the book is that about a month or two into my job, I had a very brave employee who came up to me and said, just wanted to let you know, we have a Debra Corey support group that meets every Friday, and we talk about how you made us cry. And you know what? I share that story because not that I'm proud of it, but it was a learning moment for me. And after that, I went and I said, I know you've thrown me into a new job. There's no time for training, but you know what? You need to help me. I'm failing, and I'm failing my people, and I'm failing my company. So yeah, absolutely. I think as a new boss, drag your heels, drag your feet, whatever it is, and get the skills that you need. Because if not, very few of us are going to succeed.
Absolutely. Well said. Thanks, Deborah.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Just kind of building on that point, there's something in that for me, Deborah. You know, we talk a lot about the fact that I really like your point about, you know, the motivation for people wanting to manage others. I actually really don't enjoy managing people at all. And I've led quite sizable teams, and I did my absolute best that I could, but you know, like you say, it's a real irony for me that companies always talk about, you know, our people are our best assets and all that stuff. We don't get anything done unless we get done through our people. And yet you don't need any qualifications to manage people. And it's the biggest job that there is, really. And when you do manage people, I know for me, I'm kind of a bit of a lifelong nerd, and I did lots of reading, and I made lots of mistakes. I'll share some with you in a minute, you know. But I only then got that development when I proved myself. It's kind of too late. Well, not too late by then, because I'm always up for learning. I said I'm a lifelong nerd. I'm always doing some course or other. But so I could have done with this like 2-3 years ago when I started, you know, managing people, because I hadn't got a clue. And one of mine was, you know, trying so desperately to be liked by my team, trying so desperately to do the right thing. I absolutely overstepped the boundary, and have a background as a psychologist. And I remember one of my team has some pretty severe mental health problems. And I was like, I can help them, I can save them, I can fix them. And got to this point where me and this wonderful girl, she's totally fine now, years and years ago, sat on the downs outside Brighton, and I was having this conversation. I suddenly had this light bulb moment. I was like, what on earth am I doing? This is like so far out of my comfort zone. I'm a psychologist, but I'm not a therapist. So this is not my area of specialism. And I thought, I really need some help, because this could have gone really bad if something had happened to this person. So luckily I went back, right, you need some professional help, and it's not me. And we got the help, and the company were really supportive. But that was my kind of light bulb moment. But yeah, there's something in there. Is it how we help people to get good at this stuff? And you know, whether it's formal training or mentoring, I think mentoring and coaching for me is probably far more effective. Yeah. But you just kind of expect people to know what to do, and I think that's really, really unfair. And even if people like me really want to do the right thing, you know, we all get it wrong. And the other thing I was going to say is, like, I think we've all got stories about bad bosses, and I think there is that psychopath boss, and like you said, they're not all over the place. But I've been lucky enough or unlucky enough to have two in my time. The first one, everyone, like most people have heard this story, is when same company actually, and he was a new boss. He just come in, and when I told him I was pregnant with my son, who's now 19, he said to me in all seriousness, and do you know who the father is? And now I would call that out, but I had a few like that. But I just think, you know, we need to make it unacceptable for people to behave like that in these positions as well. So mine was a bit more a ramble and a bit of reflection on what you've said so far, but I think it's super helpful, the stuff that you've been sharing.
Well, do you know what? First of all, thank you for sharing those. And it is scary, the things that people say to one another. And it's like, sometimes you just want to shake them and say, did you really mean to say that? But what I wanted to say, I did a talk once and somebody came up to me afterwards, and I love what they do. They said, do you know what? We decided that we would give people sort of like a chance to try out being a boss.
Yeah.
To see whether or not you even like it. Because a lot of times you think you might want to do it, but then, you know, it's like you buy a new outfit, it looks great, and then you take it home and it looks horrible. So they sort of, you know, throw people into little baby boss projects or something like that and give people an opportunity to see if it works. And I think that makes sense. And then the other thing that you said that I think is so important is a lot of times we expect things from bosses that they shouldn't. You know, your bit about, you know, helping people. And like I've put in employee assistance programs before, and some of the bosses will say to me, but that's what my job is. My job is to listen to my people when they have a problem and, you know, help them deal with when they've got financial problems or emotional problems. And it's like, as a boss, you don't have to have all the answers. You shouldn't. Your job is to point them to the people, like an employee assistance program or a counselor, or give them time off. And I think that, you know, there is something to be said about understanding what your role is and what your role is not. Because I've overstepped the boundaries myself as well, because I just thought that was what I was supposed to do, which again, doesn't make it easy being a boss. But no, thank you for that. Interesting.
No worries. I've got loads of stories where that came from. Got a great question here I'd like to pick up from Nikki, saying, from your experience, what's the best way to approach a bad boss from the perspective of a direct report? 'Cause it's so tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, do you know what's really interesting is since we wrote the book, this is why I've decided to write a second book, is I've had so many people who want me to talk about the other side. So what it's like for you. So the book is about, if you're a bad boss, what to do. But then as an employee with a bad boss, and I'm just going to talk from experience, because the title of the book, Bad Bosses Ruin Lives, comes from a personal story. And we don't have time. I don't want to share it with you now. But long story short, a couple months afterwards, after I left the company and everything, I ran into the person and finally had the courage to talk to them. And they didn't even know that they had done those things to me. And I really, really wish I had spoken to them sooner. I wish I had, because I genuinely believe, as I said before, I think most people don't intentionally. The first line in the book is that I believe that most people don't wake up in the morning and say, how can I ruin someone's life? So my thoughts are, if you have a bad boss, put your courage cape on, figure out a way to talk to them. If you feel uncomfortable, my whole approach to talking to people I feel comfortable with is go to somebody else I know who works with them, who has really good, has had great experience dealing with them, and ask them what their trick is. So like with this boss, you know, I knew there was someone who could say anything. I'm like, what do you do? What do you do? But I think the big thing is to just be brave, tell them it. Because first of all, it can't get any worse. Usually it won't get any worse, and it can only get better. But that might be naive for me. But for me, I wish I had done something like that. Or if you really have that 1% horrible boss, get yourself out of there. That's why I walked away from my job, because it was, you know, I'm a very strong person and it was starting to bring me down. And if it can do it to me, it can do it to anyone. Yeah,
definitely. Just before I hand back to Katie, I think my reflection is I hope that the culture, the workplace cultures now are very different from when that guy said to me, do you know, the father, I know I wouldn't put up with that now, but back then the world of work has changed a lot, actually, for the better, I think. And you know, I was pretty young in my career, and back then it was like it was much more hierarchical, and you know, you didn't call people out, and the way that bosses behaved back then, they would no way behave like that now and get away with it. You know, it was a lot more dodgy, actually. There's a lot of dodgy things going on, and now, thank goodness, that doesn't happen. But also people just behave better as human beings now, I think. So I hope that there are still a few out there, but I really think that culture that allows inappropriate comments or whatever it might be, I think we are seeing that diminish, which I think is a real positive step forward. So just showing my age as a Gen Xer, but I've seen in sort of all the years I've been in the workplace how it has changed beyond all recognition. And you know, I first started work, there was a pub on site, for goodness sake. That wouldn't happen now. So you know, but thank goodness it's changing. So on that note, I'm going to hand back to Katie. Let's finish up the call. I think we might have a few more questions. I haven't got time for them or not, Katie. You're good at keeping an eye on time. I'm not.
I think we could probably only squeeze one more in. I mean, one of the questions I think you've just touched on there, which was about how much you think culture impacts how individuals operate as a bad boss. So I don't know if you wanted to expand on that a little bit more, and then I think we'll probably be at time.
Yeah. One thing I would say is if I didn't have time to answer your question, by all means, just send me something through LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to answer it. It's interesting you talk about the culture piece, because I was doing a webinar and somebody answered, it was with a bunch of bosses, and somebody jumped in and said, we do not have a culture, where we've got great bosses. What do I do? And, my ending point, and it's a good one to end here, is, change happens one person at a time. So if your culture is not one where it encourages people to be great bosses, because a lot of times it isn't. I've worked in companies where the people who get ahead are those bad bosses. So if that's not your organization, be yourself. Do what you think is the right thing, because I'm a big believer that it ends up working out for the best in those situations. So create the culture, at least in your little mini team, that will work. And hopefully others will see it, and then it'll change the next people, and so on. It'll create a ripple effect.
Thank you. That's brilliant. So yes, we do only have 4 minutes or so. So if I hand over to you, Lee, do you want to wrap us up for the session?
Yeah, absolutely. Deborah, just massive thank you for that. As I said before, a really enlightening session, and you kind of brought to life a challenge that we all see, and we've all been there, and I'm definitely a bad boss survivor. But it's good, particularly like the love the use of emojis and the sort of breaking down the 10 different types of bad boss out there. Makes it much more tangible as well, I think. So big thanks to you. Really great to have you on board and sharing that. And you're very welcome, as Katie said, to come back and join us again in the future to talk about this. There's plenty more topics we could get into, but this one in particular. Thanks for everyone who joined the call as well. Those of you that are EX-based members, of course, this will be archived as one of our many webinars on the site. If you're not a member yet, please take a look. Have a look at the ex.space on the website, and take a closer look at what we're offering. Phenomenal courses coming up. We're about to kick off our EX Designer course, which is looking at the skills from, in particular, design thinking, but positive psychology and elsewhere, to really equip you to be able to design employee experiences that really unlock employee engagement. So that course kicks off the 26th of February. You've got plenty of time to sign up and come on board ahead of that. And we'll have the first global cohort kicking off then, and we'll be running it probably quarterly from there on in. But lots of other tools and templates and diagnostics and indeed learning, bite-sized learning on the site for you to dip into. It really is a professional life support system for anyone in this space of EX and engagement and people. I think that's it. Anything I've forgotten, Katie?
A quick signpost to our next session. So we have another Expert Insight session next week. I believe it is on Monday. Yes, on Monday. This one is AI and HR. Terrible combination of brilliant opportunity. We will be welcoming Ben Eubanks to come and talk to us again in this forum. I'll pop the link in the chat, and I'll make sure as well, when I send out the recording from today's session, I post that link in there as well. But that's it. So I just want to say a huge thank you as well to you, Deborah. I think that was a really, really great session, and I'll make sure that those slides are shared with the recording too.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks,
And thanks again, Deborah.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.